In this video you will see how I install a Slomo in a roundhouse Lady Anne. First of all, I get rid of the removable parts so they won't fall and or get damaged. Next job is to remove the body. 2 bolts, one on each side. Go down through the floor of the cab and hold the body in place. So we're going to remove those 2 bolts. You'll need to hold the nut on the bottom while you remove those bolts. And there are 2 more bolts that hold the body on. One each side. There. And there. It's actually sometimes easier to go inside the return rod. And now with those 4 bolts removed, we should be able to just lift the body off. Two frame spacers need to be removed to make room for the Slomo. This one here, which is between the rear axle and the mid axle, held in by 2 screws, one on either side of the chassis. You rotate the wheels to give you best access to the head of that screw, and then remove it. And same on the other side. Again, rotate the wheels, give yourself the best access. Then remove that frame spacer. The second spacer is more difficult to remove. It actually connects the base or the foot plate to the chassis frame. So we have a screw here, but then we have a screw in under the edge of the boiler, which is quite difficult to get at. So we're going to remove the servo for the reverser. And there's the screw that we're trying to remove. So we'll just take that out now. On the other side of the loco we have a second screw in a similar position. So we'll remove that one. This and the bolt on the other side that screw into the top of this spacer are slightly in under the boiler, so it's worth a little bit of care not to scratch the boiler paint with the screwdriver. Now that we've removed the two screws holding the foot plate to the spacer, we just removed two bolts that come down through the foot plate and screw into this spacer. Now we need to remove a screw which goes through the chassis rail and into the end of the spacer. And then the same on the other side. And now we can remove that second spacer. That second spacer that I just removed originally tied the foot plate to the two chassis frames. It would tend to weaken the loco. So supplied with the Slomo kit are two brackets that we'll put in place to tie the foot plate to the frames once again. And they're fitted using the screws that held the original spacer in place. So we'll go ahead and fit those brackets. I'm about to fit the brackets that are going to tie the foot plate to the frames. The brackets in your kit may be a slightly different length. There's a number of versions of these brackets, but it will fit and it will do the job. There are two threaded holes, one in the end of the bracket and one in the side. To fit the bracket, we need one of the tapped holes in the end to face the frame, and the second tapped hole that runs across the bracket will need to be oriented to accept the bolt coming down through foot plate. Now, the easiest way I've found to fit these is take the original screw you took out of the spacer, put it in the original hole where the spacer was bolted in, then hold the bracket with the long nose plier with the tapped hole up and the second tapped hole facing toward you. Then turn the screw as you lift the bracket up and the bolt will start in the threaded hole. Now we don't want that too tight yet, so just do it up until it's firm and then back it off about 1/4 of a turn. The reason we don't want it tight yet is when we fit the screw coming down through the foot plate, we need that to be able to bolt up tight onto the plate. Now, with that bracket held loosely in place by the screw through the frame, I'm going to fit the second one of the original screws into the original hole through the foot plate. And now we can nip that up. Once it's done, we can nip up the bolt in the frame. Okay, now we repeat that on the other side. I'm repeating that process to fit the bracket to the other side of the loco. Just finishing refitting the body, doing up the last 2 of the 4 bolts that hold the body in place. And now we can see the 2 brass brackets that replace the ends of the original spacer here and here. The body's in place, and so it's time to actually fit the Slomo. I'm going to take off the 2 main cranks, then remove the rear axle to fit the Slomo. The first thing I do is check this axle. If there are burrs or scratches on it, it could make it quite difficult to slide the wheels, to slide the Slomo hub on later in the install, or to slide it out through the bushes. There could be burrs and scratches caused by the grub screws, especially if the engine's been regauged a lot of times. So I just give it a little rub with a bit of wet and dry. No coarser than 400. I turn it, quarter turn. Just to make sure that that wheel slides easy. Yep, looks good. Then the other side. Might need a little bit more if there's any big gouges in it. But we don't want to reduce the diameter of the axle because the wheel won't run concentric then. But this axle's pretty good. Okay. I like to leave the wheel right out to the frame at this point. We need to remove the bolt that holds the crank in place. So rotate the wheels to get best access to the bolt. Now this is why I like to leave the wheel near the frame. We need to lever this crank off, and I prefer to lever against the wheel than to lever against the frame. Okay, that one's off. Repeat the process on the other side. Rotate the wheel to get good access to the bolt. Actually, this crank looks like it's quite loose, so that's an easy one to get off. Now we take the crank off with the return crank and the rod in place. That means we don't have to do anything with the timing later on. It'll still be correct when you put it back together. I'm going to remove the crank pin from the center axle on one side of the loco. This lets us lift the con rods up and out of the way, so we can remove the rear axle. This is the last of the preparation for the install. I want to keep these conrods and cranks out of the way, so I've tied them up with a piece of wool up to the front buffer. I want the wheels on the middle axle to be well out of the way. So I make sure that they're out towards the frames. This is the replacement axle that's included in the Slomo kit. You see it has a flat machined. That flat is in the centre, and so when we fit the axle to the loco, it can go in either way around. Now it's time to prepare the Slomo for the install. On the base of the Slomo you'll find this small cover that gives us access to the wheel hub, the gear hub that will be fastened to the back axle. So firstly we need to take out these two bolts. One. Two, and remove the cover. Now if I can get the light in the right place, we can see that inside there is a black gear mounted on a hub, stainless steel hub. Somewhere in that hub is a grub screw that will hold the gear hub onto the rear axle. At the moment we've got a little brass keeper in there. I've found the grub screw. If it's not in sight, just give the gear a bit of a rotation, a few degrees at a time, until you can find the grub screw. So undo the grub screw, but only half a turn of the Allen key. No more than half a turn, or the grub screw might come out of the hub and fall into the Slomo, and then you've got a disassembly job on your hands. So we've loosened the grub screw and we removed the keeper. A little piece of brass you can put in your scrap box for later. The front mount has to be prepared as well. When the Slomo is in the locomotive, the centre axle of the loco will run in this slot. So we need to open up the mount so we can pass it around the middle axle of the loco. There's a grub screw on the top. Same thing, only probably need half a turn. And take the brass pin out, which will let you swing that front mount. Okay, so now we're ready to put it in the loco. So now that the loco is ready and the Slomo is ready, we'll just fit it in. First thing to do is to fit the front bracket onto the middle axle of the loco. There's our Slomo, ready to go. So this bracket needs to go under the middle axle of the loco, and then swing it up and put it into the position then refit the brass pin, the position it was when we took the Slomo out of the packet. And then we tighten the stainless scrub screw. Next I'll fit the rear axle into the loco and through the Slomo. This is the axle that comes in the kit with the Slomo. You can see it has a flat machined in the centre. That flat picks up the grub screw in the gear hub and helps it to stop slipping on the axle. I find it easiest to lift the Slomo right out of the way and get one wheel in place, then start the axle in the bush of the locomotive and through the wheel, let the Slomo drop and get the axle started in the bearing of the Slomo and slowly move it through. Just shuffle these components across. When it's barely protruding, get your second wheel, put it in place, and it's a little more difficult for me because I'm trying to keep out of the way of the camera so you guys can see. Okay, and when it starts to jam, just shuffle these components across one at a time. Until the axle starts in the bush on the other side of the loco. So we want the Slomo just very roughly in the centre for now. The next thing I do is tighten one wheel. Which lets me rotate the axle. Now we want to, with the Slomo fairly well centered and the axle fairly well centered, we need this grub screw to pick up the flat on the axle. So I'm going to put a little bit of weight on this grub screw, wind it in till it just starts to touch the axle. And I'm turning the axle and there's the flat the screw can grab. Okay. It is quite important that the grub screw does sit on that flat on the axle. If it doesn't, the grub screw will protrude out of the gear hub further than it should, and it may hit on another gear or something in the Slomo and cause damage. So it's worthwhile taking some time and get that feel of when the grub screw is on the normal part of the axle and then when it fits into the flat and you can screw it further in. Which will hold the crank approximately in place. Then I can line up the squaring and tighten the bolt. Once that's done, we need to refit the cover. It's best to get the 2 screws in before you tighten either of them. Once they're both almost nipped down, then you can just give them a little tighten up. And at this stage you want to re-gauge the wheels, and we're ready to run.